everyone. Welcome to Unit 10 of the semester and our discussion about records and record keeping in the law firm. I actually think this is a really interesting topic for us to dive into right after we spent some time in our last unit talking about the law office itself, the physical law office, and of course spent some time thinking about the idea of a virtual law office and wondering if we are going to be returning in person fully or some sort of hybrid or what the future of the law firm actually looks like. It's actually a really good time to also talk about records. Because here's the bottom line of working in the legal profession. There is a lot of paper. We already know that this is a profession that is greatly involved with the written word and research and writing. So even when we transition to a virtual type law office or working remotely and using computers, we cannot get rid of paper. And I love this image that I chose for this page because this is actually what a lot of attorneys' desks look like. Not all of them, some are very organized, but a lot of attorneys' desks look like this because we're working on many matters all at one time, and it's a constant figuring out each day what is the most important matter to look for and work on. And we need papers around us all the time. So what kind of records are we talking about? Well, obviously, we're talking about records pertaining to our clients and our clients' matters. And as we'll talk about through this PowerPoint, as discussed in the chapter in this book, which is chapter 10 of your book, we're not just talking about the documents that we create for our clients, like letters or pleadings, but we're also talking about documents that clients entrust to us. So we could be talking about a copy of a significant document like a will or a deed or the title to a car, or even copies of medical records or copies of emails or a lease that the client gives to us and says, here's a copy. I know you need to see my medical records. So we have a lot of documents just related to a representation of clients that are even separate from things like pleadings and court documents that we file or correspondence that we communicate with the client or with third parties related to the client matter. So think about the massive information I'm talking about here. We have our client matters and the documents related to those. We have correspondence that we draft on behalf of our clients. And again, correspondence to the court, correspondence to opposing parties, correspondence to witnesses or third parties. We have pleadings, the court documents that we file on behalf of the clients, like a complaint or an answer or a motion. What about all of our billing? We talked about keeping track of billing records and sending clients bills with transmittal letters that say, please find enclosed a copy of your bill. And then, of course, any other transactions. So the paper is paper upon paper. Again, even when we're communicating a lot over email or when we're doing a virtual law office, we can't get away from the fact that we are a paper-driven profession. So that raises a question for us and something we can explore, which is how much paper do we want to hold on to and how much do we want to keep in electronic files? Hopefully your desk does not look like this, and hopefully it looks something more like this, which is a little bit more organized. Again, these are just some clip art I found. Sorry, my face is kind of in the middle of it. This is some clip art that I found online, but at least we can see how we can organize paper files. So I want to talk a little bit about paper files, and then I want to talk about electronic files and some advantages and disadvantages. We've talked a lot over the discussion board this semester, so I know that many of you still prefer reading an old-fashioned book or having paper documents in front of you. I think I do a mix. I like some of my documents to be electronic, but I like paper as well. And so if you're going to use a paper filing system, again, go back to the PowerPoint and see the numbers of types of documents that we have: client matters, correspondence, pleadings. For a paper document system, there needs to be a robust organizational system. And what I mean by that is ask yourself, if you're managing the law office or you're managing even your own files related to matters that you're working on, how would you organize them? Would you organize them by client name alphabetically? And if so, would it be last name? And then if so, what if you have multiple clients with the same last name? How do you keep that aspect organized? Or if you have client Sugarman, but let's say you represent Sugarman in multiple matters. So you might represent Sugarman in the drafting of her will, but you also might represent Sugarman in the sale of her house. And maybe you've even represented Sugarman as a plaintiff in a small lawsuit. Those are what we call the client matters, all the same client, but a different matter. So one of the challenges to paper systems is how to organize those files. If you do organize them alphabetically, client last name or the name of the company is a very common way. And then within, let's say, Sugarman, you might have then subdivision, Sugarman related to the matter of drafting her will, Sugarman related to the matter of the sale of her home. And then within that file, then you can subdivide even further, correspondence, pleadings, letters, bills, whatever it is. And then you organize that way. Another way to do this would be numerically. As described in your book, there is a way, and many law firms do this, even if they organize their files alphabetically, each client is given a client ID number. And then every time a new matter is opened for that client, it is opened under a second number. So Sugarman might be client, 1,234. So every time someone at the law firm is working under a Sugarman matter, it's under the client of 1234. And we can use that same number for billing purposes. We can use that same number if we need to put a code into the copy machine. And maybe we use that same number to organize all the files related to Sugarman. But then the matter can be an additional number. So I might be client 1234, and the drafting of my will is matter 1. And then the sale of my home is matter 2, and so on and so forth. There needs to be some structure, and everybody in the law firm needs to adhere to it. Because, as we'll see when we get to the end of the PowerPoint, and you'll see for homework purposes, safekeeping of client records and retention of client records, that is, keeping them and holding on to them, is an ethical obligation. So we need to educate ourselves when we join a new firm as to how client documents and matters are stored, and then make sure that you follow whatever system it is that your firm adheres to. The other than ethical obligations, the other more practical reason is that we need to find the information. If you're working on the Sugarman will matter and you pull the matter, pull the file from the shelf, and then another paralegal or an attorney goes to look for the file, they're going to be looking in the exact spot where you took it from. And that's okay, but that helps us stay organized. And then, of course, we return the file when we're done or add to it. So it's really important when we're working together as a team in a law office. It's not a time for you to devise your own records management system. You might have your own way of tackling your work, and everybody works in their own methods, but this is a really important part of being part of the firm environment. So I don't know how you guys feel about paper, but what do you feel about electronic files? I mean, obviously having everything, I'm looking at my laptop right now, having all of my classes on Blackboard and all of my files electronically, I have cut down on a lot of paper over the years. When I meet classes face-to-face, I do often give handouts in photocopies, but it is much easier to keep electronic copies, and you could have, in a law firm, an electronic filing system that everyone in the firm has access to. So again, it's not just that it's stored on your personal computer and someone else can't log on and see it. It would be part of what we call the network, the intranet, something we talked about earlier this semester, where everybody can have access to those documents. So it's not about it being private on your computer. So obviously there are numerous advantages, just like we talked about with the virtual law office, of cutting down on paper and easier access. That's clear. So electronic filing has major advantages. Another advantage of electronic filing is easier to copy and send extra copies of the document to different places. So let's say there's certain pleading, you want to file it in more than one area. If you're paper filing, you're going to have to photocopy it, which is of course time consuming, and it's going to be expensive because you're going to be using toner, ink, paper, right? I mean, these things add up. You make a second copy, you put it in the file where you want it. If you're doing it electronically, you can just cut and paste files, and that certainly is easier. But as we've learned this semester about security risks and other problems, there are, of course, downsides to using electronic filing. One of them being what I just mentioned, security, needing to make sure that your electronic files are secure. But also, I put a picture of CDs on here. This is a real serious risk with any business venture that's investing in technology, is that ultimately the technology will become obsolete. So in terms of continuing your records management in a fully electronic format, just be mindful that the format that seems new and shiny and most efficient today will likely become obsolete in the next couple of years, and certainly 5 or 10 years down the road, you're going to wonder, why did we always do it that way? That doesn't mean don't invest in it. It doesn't mean don't use the electronic filing, but just be mindful that whatever you choose, whatever system you choose, will be replaced by something more efficient and more, the newest technology. And here's the critical part. You will need a way to still access the documents that you once stored under the obsolete format. So some of you might remember things like floppy disks, or, the little disks we had I should have put an image of that on here. The floppy disks we used to put into computers. Then we had the 3x5 little hard disks. Then ultimately we moved to CDs and CD-ROMs onto a flash drive. And even all of this is obsolete because what are we using today? The cloud. So the key takeaway here is make sure not to look at those old files and think, oh my God, how am I going to get that off a floppy disk? Because now I don't have a drive for it anymore. True story, I wanted to take my wedding video and watch it, and it's on a VHS tape. So I had to take it to a place in town that transferred it to a DVD, and then from there gave it to me on a flash drive that we could put into a computer. But the point being, you don't want to be in a situation where you need to access client documents and you can't because the technology has become obsolete. So just be mindful of that as we think about the ways to store client files. Okay, speaking of client files, I'll go through this really quickly because this actually has a lot to do with your homework assignment. I'm just going to drop to the bottom of this slide here and talk about ethics. So as we mentioned, storing client documents also has ethical implications. Obviously, we've already talked about attorney-client privilege and attorney work product and making sure we store information. But the bigger question comes up with, who owns those client files? Who do they really belong to? Do they belong to the law firm, or do they belong to the client, or both? And what about when a client wants to see their file? Do they just have the right to walk into your law office and look for it? Who pays for the copying cost if they want a copy of it? And what happens when a client, says, I no longer want you to be my lawyer, I'm moving to another lawyer? Or what happens when the matter ends? So those are some really critical issues that the rules of professional responsibility speak directly to. So I wanted to mention it here, but for your homework assignment, you'll be doing something interesting by looking at one of the newest ethical rules in Massachusetts that I've put right on your Blackboard page. And I've given you some hypotheticals to read about retention of client files that directly relates to these issues. So take a look at those and at the new rule. Again, you don't have to memorize it, but I want you to read it and understand how it operates, because this is something really important to the running of the law office. All right, that's the end of the PowerPoint. I look forward to seeing you on the discussion board this week.